So this is one of those festivals where I've just been worried for you all if you got your Christ the King cards out on time. Did you get those out, right? I mean, I know the stores have been a little crazy, but Postal Service lagging a little bit. But Christ the King, right? Just flooding the market with those cards. It's kind of on some way, kind of like the Arbor Day of church festivals, right? We have this and we have Holy Trinity Sunday, which is another card getter. We had at staff meeting this last week a little bit of a short history on Christ the King, because as you might imagine, not all of these festivals come at the same time. Now, Easter comes from pretty early on, as you might imagine. Christmas, likewise, comes from pretty early on, but not all of the festivals happen in that same fashion. And in fact, as we celebrate Christ the King Sunday today, in Germany today is Ewigkeitssonntag, Eternity Sunday, which kind of combines some of our sense of All Saints Sunday today. But when we think about Christ the King Sunday, and we were talking about it at staff meeting, Tim brought up a few points of its history. It actually goes back to about the year 1922. Yeah, so not even a century ago. Close, but not even a century ago. Benito Mussolini, whose name you were probably not expecting to hear in today's sermon, he had just been put in charge of Italy. And the Italian Pope was not a big fan of the cult of worship of Benito Mussolini. And so in 1925, the Pope added a festival to the church year to state that not Benito Mussolini, but Christ is king. Christ is king. Now, as Americans, we tend to laugh at these other countries that have had these silly problems with confusing their government and their patriotism with their Christian faith, since that never, ever, ever happens in the United States. However, I'm reminded of a movie I saw a few years ago. Some of you perhaps saw it, Zero Dark 30. It is the story of the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. The first half of the movie is kind of the intelligence history, and then it is the actual mission itself. But what struck me in light of today's text is what the men who attacked bin Laden said on the radio. They had a code word, which in this month, as we remember our Native American sisters and brothers, seems particularly curious. But the code word for a successful mission was Geronimo. Geronimo. And then what was said is, for God and country. Geronimo. There is a huge piece of patriotism, and my Christian self is horrified. If we think of the earliest Christians within the life of the church in the first centuries, the idea that our loyalty would be first or on par between God and the empire, the early Christians would say, you are off track. For God and country is not something that a first century Christian would have been able to say. Now, we start to get to Constantine, and the church is brought into the empire, and then there was a big marketing scheme to say God and country. And throughout history, in all kinds of different countries, it has been God and country. But I want to step away from that language a bit. Today is not God as king, it is Christ the King Sunday. Step away from that language entirely. And in this gospel text, we have this story of this exchange between Pilate and Jesus, who is the Christ. There was a theologian at an event I was at just a couple weeks ago in Minneapolis whose comment was, Christ is not the family's last name. It's not Mary and Joseph Christ and their boy Jesus. It is Jesus the Christ, the Messiah. When we think about that image of Christ and Pilate talking, we have this image of two very different individuals in that space. Pilate being the Roman governor of that area of Palestine, this tense place that is prone to flare-ups of violence and rebellion. Pilate did not get the ambassadorship to Paris or something like that. He was sent to Jerusalem. It was a step up, but it was perhaps not unlike some of the less desirable ambassadorships that get handed out at the beginning of a new presidency. It's like, oh yay, send me there, right? And Pilate was sent there in part because he was not known as being soft. In fact, history outside of Scripture says that he was a classic strongman, one who was not afraid to put the heat on the population to keep a lid on things. Pilate was not known as being a nice guy. And where is Pilate's authority from? Popular election? No. He was appointed by the emperor. Or for the sake of today's gospel reading, we'll say the king, right? Who has appointed Pilate. Now, where is Jesus coming in? Is Jesus coming in at the head of an army? Is he stating that his authority is because we took a straw poll of all of the poor people in Jerusalem and they said I should be in charge? Did he win a beauty pageant? No. My kingdom is not of this world. In some ways, we might say authority. My authority is not from this world. My kingdom is not from this world. So we have Jesus the Christ showing up in conflict with both the Jewish leadership and the Roman authorities, because each of them had a box that he was supposed to fit in. For the Romans, the box was king. Then he is competing with the emperor, and we know what to do with people who set themselves up. And what do kings do? They are tough. They have armies. They conquer lands. They put down rebellion. They have power over others. And ultimately, the ability to diminish one's life or to take it from them. Now, curiously, on the Jewish side of the equation, the box that's labeled Messiah, or in Greek, Christ, oddly looks very similar. This is the descendant of King David, and what is David known for? With force of arms, uniting the nation. By force of arms. Jesus is being presented with an option. Are you A or B? And he says, I am love. And everybody says, but we don't have a box for that. You gotta pick a box. And Jesus refuses to be put in a box. Now, what happens when Jesus refuses to be put in a box? People say, we can't deal with you. You're a problem. You are a problem. Now, what happens when this sense of authority, strength, force of arms, be it perhaps even violence, becomes understood as that's what leadership is? That is empire. That is nation. That is God and country. Right? Well, then we have some struggles. I think in the United States, we kind of go through times of struggle throughout our history, and we like to think that this time that we are in is strange in our American history. But I would argue that perhaps this time in our history is sadly common to our American history. this sense of strength, force against others within our society. We see the angst out of the court decision on Friday in relationship to Kyle Rittenhouse. There was a quote from a congressman afterwards to their constituency saying, "Be armed, be violent, be moral." And then the part that wasn't said is, "for God and country." Right? Isn't that what Jesus said from the cross? Be armed, be violent, and be moral. Did Jesus say that? I think maybe it's not the Gospel of John. Maybe it's Mark, right? No, that's not the image. Jesus' leadership and sovereign power in our world comes through what we as God and country humans tend to think as defeat and loss. Christ's strength comes through his death and then resurrection, bringing life after death. Whereas human beings, we understand death as the end power. It is the end power of empire. It is the end power over others, is to take away and diminish life. And Christ says, I am not playing your game. I am here to serve others in love no matter who they are, no matter where they're from, no matter what their first language is, no matter what they look like. I am here to serve my neighbor in love, even at the cost of my life. Now, I would argue that today in our society, there's a term that's come up in the last couple of decades, since September 11th of 2001, concern about others typically, and their radicalization. How did they become radicalized, right? It's a phrase we would often use about this kind of lone wolf violence. But I think we need to broaden our scope as to what it means to be radicalized, where it becomes normalized that teenagers take long guns into other cities as a part of just another day in the United States. But how do we as people of faith become radicalized in the way in which Christ has led us? Are we radicalized towards love in a way that is self-sacrificing, contrary to God and country culture? That's a real challenge. It has always fascinated me in history when we see people who are at 90 degrees to the threads of their culture. What does that mean today for us as Christian people? To understand that when Christ says, I am here to testify to the truth, that truth is a life of love lived towards others when we don't deserve it, when they don't deserve it, when it is as cost to us, that we are called to love others not just with our hearts, but with our hands also. This is a disquieting time in our nation. And I think this text and this Sunday of Christ the King challenges us to understand where our allegiance lies. So as you sort through the newspapers, the texts for today, be mindful that Christ is claiming our loyalty first and alone, and that he claims us for love. Amen.